It's later now. I had to make some room on my phone for talking. And I kind of don't feel like talking. It feels weird in this space by myself. It just feels so open and cold. Like it doesn't feel like home. So I'm feeling that, but I'm going to continue to talk to myself a little, even if I'm a bit less energetic, because I have a lot written down here, and I don't know if it's anything new. And where I left off was with all these disjointed words, but words to myself, it seems. I say meds put us back to sleep, so just use them for sleep. So they put us back into the sleepiness of believing that we're separate. And it's also sleepiness that would have us operate based on repetitive thoughts. So think about how when we're lost in our repetitive thoughts, we drive from point A to point B, and when we get to point B, we're like, how the heck did I get here? I don't even know. And I've never had that sensation in many, many years. I don't remember the last time I thought, how did I get from here to there? It never happens because I'm very aware and awake. So awake that I feel like the next level below the really awake state and the perceptive state and the seeing each instant even while driving state is the sleepiness of thought, of being lost in that repetition of history that has nothing to do with the moment, right? So we're lost in that, has nothing to do with the moment to moment of driving, but then we're like, how did I get here? I don't remember that. For me, I know each moment. I never have that sense like I missed something. And it's funny enough, thought would give us the sense that we're missing something or something's missing from life. But it's the very process of thought that makes us miss life. And it's quite simple when we don't miss life based on thought, which is a waste of energy through thought circuits, and if they don't go, the energy doesn't properly go through the perceptual circuits. When we have the energy go through the perceptual circuits, we find that life is quite beautiful in its simplicity. And that's something we get really excited about when we first go into that so-called manic state for the first time. It's simply beautiful and energizing and awe-inspiring and mysterious, and it's quite wonderful until that wonder is taken away and everything's demystified in terms of mental illness. And next idea is when you go into your dream, when you go into the light realm, you may lose relationships that are in your material nightmare. Oftentimes we're reconnected with those relationships as the mentally ill family member. And I feel like it's possible that when Eckhart Tolle talks about the thinking mind and then watching thought such that it stops and one is connected with the silence of presence and being in the now. Being in the now, that sounds wonderful, but I feel like that could be an intermediate phase. In that if most people around one are lost in thought, I'm kind of like in this now, which feels like a ball. It doesn't feel like everything everywhere always. It feels like this kind of ball, like I'm in this point, like now. I'm not saying that that's what he's implying, but I feel like when there are more people that are present, I think we would start being in dialogue with each other and creating eternity and creating heaven. And I don't know if we would just sit around and look at what's happening in the world, I think we would start seeing that world falling apart and the heaven on earth becoming visible. So I think it's a little bit different, possibly. But who knows? And I remember saying something to Steve Pavlina by email, and he said something which was, mania shared equals inspiration and genius, or something like that. So to me, it's creativity, obviously, inspiration, genius, meaning, perception, a lot of different things. So far, I've kept it mostly to myself, but I'm finding clues that a lot of people like me think in similar ways. So I'm excited at some point to have dialogue about that. And I made a note to myself here, focus on sharing memes and not getting off medication. I was talking about that earlier, about how I'm not so focused on getting off the medication. I feel they'll naturally fall away when the time is right, and I think it provides some kind of tranquilizing antenna to a more tranquilized way of being, which most people are operating in. It sort of allows the brain to stay in a lower energy of processing. And there used to be a thing going around about we only use 5% of our brain, and lately they've said that's not really true. But I think whatever parts of the brain that we don't use, whether it's 95% or what have you, it looks like we're using 95%. If you look at the state of the world, it looks like we're using 5%. I mean, but I feel like we need to create and awaken those areas of the brain. It's not necessarily going to happen for us, even though in mania it seems like all systems of the brain come online at the same time and it's sort of just given to us. But I think it's very rare that it stays. So we might think it can just sort of happen, but it still takes work, again, to sort of look at the future in retrospect and kind of decode the mystery of having such a rapid shift in consciousness, and decode what it's trying to show us and tell us, and what that means about the nature of reality, and so many things. And I think it's something to do with human potential, and also a swarm type intelligence, like how social insects can create such magnificent structures compared to what they are individually. And if we're all working together, we would build something a lot more magnificent than, structures of commerce and then people suffering and those who take a lot of education to help them because they were able to continue on the educational path that marginalizes a lot of different types of brains. And just like those videos I was talking about with that researcher who says that there's a growth mindset and they can tell kids, hey, you can grow your brain, you can get smarter, blah, blah, blah. And they do end up getting a lot smarter than if it's seen as something that is inborn in us. And it seems I made a note to myself, sit here still and share the memes and not go off into manic ecstasy. So I could go off into manic ecstasy, but I'm pretty sure I'd turn into light and no longer exist in the material realm. And maybe I'll test that one day, but if I'm right, only I will know, and I won't be, I want to say here anymore, but I should say there, as in the past, in the history. I'll be here in the now, which is eternity in heaven on earth, and people will be lost in whatever they're lost in. So here I am, sitting here, not acting like a maniac, and all the manic action, it could take like one manic gesture. It's probably infinitely more powerful than 10,000 words. But I'm going to sit here and be a talking head, because if I go off into doing gestures of that, then people notice a lot more than me talking to myself on my phone alone. And create light with words. You know, we think words are sound. They're sound. And that sound is usually tied to something matter. Like, we're usually referring to something of matter. Not always, but the sounds we make are tied into our brain cells and the matter of our facial structure and everything that's able to make the sounds. So it is tied into matter. And there are certain words that point to light, that make the world less dense and more fluid and more light, a higher vibration. It doesn't take much to walk through the walls of the words of thought and into a world that's not based on the structures of thought and belief that we've been given to believe. They've been given to us to give into. So, also, I was thinking about nations, and there could be I'll say the word, bipolar nation of people who are part of one nation, not based on lines on a map, on arbitrary lines on a map and where one is born, but on brain resonance and brain algorithms and level of vibration. The ability to shift states from being this dense material thought form of a body to being a light body that's based on subjectivity of perception in the moment. And the moment is all light, it's all vibration, it's all energy. And then, we think of matter as the fundamental stuff of reality, but it's more like an interface. It's not really what it's based on. So the computer is an interface, but it's so much more inside that it's based on. But we have that as the interface. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to use the technology. So matter could be the technology with which we're able to interact with reality, but it's not super fundamental. It can bend and change if necessary. And I've talked before how mania is kind of like augmented actuality. I don't say reality, because reality is our thought conditioning. It's usually consensus reality, but there's something that's actual, and we're not moving based on that. So then I created this sort of idea of needing to strengthen the meme immune system. So we have a physical immune system. Most people are aware of that. And it's very active and can remember if there's a contact with some kind of pathogen, and it fights it off. It remembers that, so next time it gets to it really quick. It will kill that pathogen before we're even aware of any kind of physical symptoms. So I feel like there could be a meme immune system. And we could think about it like when we're kids, we don't have a very strong physical immune system. We don't really have a very strong meme immune system. So if our dad says that we're stupid, then we might take that on as something that we think. So that virus of words coming from somebody of an authority infects us, and then it gets stuck in there making loops. Like every time it repeats itself, it just made a copy of itself. It just added to itself. And, you know, just like genes copy and cells divide, these memes, they repeat. So if we don't have a strong meme immune system, then we can be subject to these words getting stuck and entrapped in our system. And so, for example, if we get diagnosed with a mental illness and a psychiatrist says, hey, you have bipolar disorder, you're going to have to take these meds forever, you're going to be in and out of the hospital, take your meds, blah, blah, blah. If we've never heard that before and we've never experienced that kind of health authority coming at us, those years of knowledge stored up in a brain that paid a lot of money to think that way, likely that's going to affect us somehow. So sometimes we believe it, sometimes we don't, sometimes we're a bit confused. And then once we get a little bit of strength, like physical strength or strength in terms of having our own safe space to be, we can start to educate ourselves about other ways of thinking about these things in order to keep those other memes that people are telling us to think away. So that's part of why I've created these memes and this context with myself, because I feel that strengthens my immune system to memes, to words, to mind viruses. And, you know, if I believe what they say, then that guarantees that I'll be walking in the system of mental health for a really long time. But if I don't necessarily believe that, and I decide to create my own context, and one might think, well, why am I doing this so much? I've been talking to myself for a little over 2 years, but a psychiatrist studies for, say, 10 years, maybe 7, I don't know. And, you know, I've talked to maybe 4, 5, 6 different psychiatrists over the years from hospitals and different mental health centers. So if you take 6 psychiatrists times 7 years of education, that's 42 years of studying, and they study for how many hours a day? So for me to talk to myself and write stuff out for probably on average an hour a day or half an hour a day, and the time it takes to write stuff out and the time it takes for it to come to mind, that's nothing compared to how much these psychiatrists have studied, let alone pharmacists, let alone mental health workers and clinicians and pharmacy assistants and psych nurses. So there is years and years and years and years and years of memes and you know, thousands of square kilometers of brain cells that are moving in this, and those brain cells are moving people wearing white coats with different pills that have been created over many years. So I feel it's really important to talk to myself as much as I can and create as many different ways of thinking about it. And hopefully one day, maybe not my lifetime, but maybe, I won't need to talk about extrapolating from mental health. I'll be able to create memes. I'll be able to create meaning and enjoy it and share it with other people. And they'll be able to have joy in it, just like people being happy in mania and celebrating life, just like little kids do, until we train that out of them. And the higher that we vibe, the noisier this consensus world is. So I don't like the noise of news or social media or so many different things. It just seems noisier. And I don't like that, because it's like noise that interferes with receiving meaning from the moment. If there's a certain level of noise, it's hard to It's hard to hear the universe. I'd rather hear the universe than TV or news. It's a lot more interesting. And, growing the brain cells to be tuned into the universe. And all this that I'm talking about might not sound very interesting, but I'm glad that my brain isn't shrinking, and I'm not, like, I'm sort of in control of what's happening to myself mental health wise, for the most part. At least I feel that way, and that's what matters. And I feel like we don't really have temporary insanity when we go into mania, but temporary immunity from ego thought and personal memory. So we go into a world away from history. So we get temporary immunity to ego thought and the way we've been trained to see what matters based on what we've been told matters, like education or, getting a job, getting married, having kids, and never quite feeling like that is meaningful because it's a cookie cutter lifestyle that has been given to us. So in that way, we often live quite spontaneous and different lives when we're in so-called mania, because we're immune from the structures we've been conditioned with. So it's like a temporary immunity. And then to go with that, when that immune system breaks down, and going from the creative meaning-making algorithm of the brain in subjectivity and more of a quantum light of possibility, when that immunity goes away, then a lot of the thought systems start coming at us in the terms of family members saying you're different, or family or psychiatry capturing us. And it's quite a fearful thing to be chased down by thought in the form of memories of other people saying this is how we were, or thought contained within psychiatric brains, etc. I'm not fully against psychiatry. I feel we can work to increase our meme immune system and stay away from memes that we didn't come up with ourselves, and neither did the people that were trained with those memes. And it's kind of scary to decide not to believe that, because it is a safe way of deciding, hey, I'm not going to learn about my brain and stuff. I'm going to believe what they say and sit and eat chips. So, we can be immune to the memes of mental illness, or let them wither and die. So not really resisting them. I've found in the last 2 years, as I've worked on not resisting them, it just kind of falls away. Like the system's like, we're going to close your mental health file. It's like, oh, okay. I feel like I don't really need you anymore, and you're agreeing. So it's there to help us, even if it does harm us sometimes. But it really is there to help, and the harm that it causes us is often them projecting our own fear back at us. And so it is really important to, be free of that fear. And what we resist persists. That's a cliche, but it's sort of true. And even if one day I'm recaptured by psychiatry because I'm not able to deal with the fear, I know I can grow my brain back, so I'm not really that worried about it. So I'm not talking from the standpoint of, hey, I'll never need psychiatry again. I wouldn't be surprised, I shouldn't say this, but I wouldn't be surprised if they shock my brain in ECT one day or something, and I'll be kind of happy that they erase my memories. So, I'm open to it. Shock me, go right ahead. It's not going to destroy the universe. And I also wondered if we could create sparks. I talked a little bit about sparks, to spark mania. Could there be certain sparks that spark something besides executive functioning? I was talking recently about the executive functioning we have has been conditioned into us. And part of what this switch into so-called mania or higher energetic states of the brain is doing is trying to create new circuits of functioning in different ways that aren't going to destroy the planet, that aren't going to destroy other people, blah, 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 you know. So are there sparks that would spark that? You know, the mental health recovery systems, like we need to try to spark people, to motivate people to be excited about going to get a job at McDonald's and making a little bit of money on top of this and that, and then, you know, being happy that they can only afford to sit in their apartment with Netflix the rest of the time. So is there a way to spark creativity? Is there a way to spark creating meaning? Is there a way to spark people sharing their talents? Is there a way to spark energy of the joy of living, of being alive? And is there a way to spark learning? So for me, I see this conversation with myself as sparking my own learning. I'm learning. I'm definitely learning, and the brain is designed to learn. So I'm doing something that the brain is designed to do. But we've mistaken learning for memorizing and accumulating knowledge. And I think there'll be a trend one day that is the opposite of what we want to be able to do. We don't want to be able to store knowledge in our brains because that puts the energy into the wrong circuits. We have technology now to be our memory. We don't need to keep these recordings in our brain so much. But we do need to be able to perceive in the moment. So it would be smarter to be able to design an environment where perception of the moment can guide us. Like, for example, having fridges that have a glass door or something, so we can see what we want out of our peripheral vision and go and get it. That's how I usually operate when I'm in the more energized state of consciousness. I go based on what I can see. So I don't like things in drawers or anything because what I see is what gets me to move, not what I'm thinking about. Sounds simple, but it's very important. So meaning is subjective and creative, not objective and conditioned. This is the switch. Our consciousness is participatory and not objective. We think that we're objective, we're seeing things as they are, but really we're objectifying our things based on our projection from memory. And there's a lot more information out there than our projections from memory, and we're totally missing out. And spiritual emergency, the term, it's possible that one day it won't be an emergency anymore when we're not afraid of the fact that we're alone. Meaning, we're not alone when we're part of this system of thought. So, for example, if I'm alone with the context I've created, I wouldn't want to reattach myself to somebody or something just to be a part of the crowd of thought. I'm trying to crowd out those thoughts, and it really is to be alone, and that's part of the fear of the transition between the modes of the brain. Is there's a real feeling of the terror of loneliness at a certain point. I had that a lot in October last year. It was really scary, and I ended up having to take meds because of it. And this time recently in June, I felt the mechanism of wanting to reattach to something, like calling for help in some way. But this time I knew that the help of either the system or people that I know wouldn't be help. It would just be reattaching to feel secure, be reattaching to the movement of egos. So I decided to be alone with it, and that wasn't as scary this time around. And I also feel there's a bipolar hierarchy of needs. So there's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but I feel that the hierarchy of needs and values for bipolar could be a lot different. And I was watching a couple videos by Peter Breggin, Dr. Peter Breggin, on his website, and he is anti-psychiatry. I'm not fully anti-psychiatry, even though it sounds like it. I'm pro using your own brain to use the tools of psychiatry as you decide, not needing them to lord over us and like spoon feed us medication and keep us feeling like we're going to be dependent on them forever. And one thing he said in one of the videos that struck me is he was saying that medications only work by making you less of who you really are. And I think that's true. I think that I take meds to remain less of who I really am because none of us know who we are. And that's part of the trick of it all. Is it's not that I'm mentally ill or someone else is mentally ill, is that none of us know who we really are. And there's probably something more to that, but and we don't know the nature of reality. So we are the nature of reality. We are nature, we are reality. So yeah, it does make us less. It makes us feel like we're back in this separate self. It makes us feel like we have this problem of being a mentally ill person. And it puts most of our energy towards dealing with this problem, this big personal problem. When we go into those altered states, oftentimes we can see the world's problems playing out before us, and we feel pretty powerless to change it. But often, since we feel powerless, we often end up kicking and screaming and yelling and miscommunicating because we just are very reactive in the moment. We can see what's happening and we give voice to that in a very energized way, and people generally don't like that. So, because we're saying they have to change. And since people don't want to change, we get changed into a mental patient. And it's interesting, I was listening to the rest of John Harold's video on process work, and he was saying the same sort of thing that I've said, but he said it in a different way. He said, people around somebody who's being pathologized need to own some of their madness. And if they take on some of their own madness, then that person who's being called mentally ill will feel a bit lighter because other people are taking it on too. Not that everyone has to act crazy or be crazy, but I've said the same thing. Like, it seems to sort of funnel into certain people who are empathic, or maybe it doesn't even funnel into people who are empathic. Maybe it just funnels into random people hoping that one will figure out how to communicate some of this and say, hey, some of us are really affected by the structure of society. It's not designed for a lot of people to be successful. We don't even know what success is. We think success is productivity and functioning. And we're conditioned to think that because that's what keeps the economy going. I don't think human beings are meant to be products of productivity. That's just weird. And I made a note about rebounding and how up and down in gravity is best for the immune system, so people who jump on the mini trampolines. And I compared that to so-called bipolar, where we kind of go up and down in consciousness or in, quote, mood. I don't really believe in moods. I think that's a characteristic of the self, which isn't there. And when we eliminate the self, we don't necessarily have moods. We have, it's a different thing. And I know that because this last time I didn't experience a depressed mood when I was going out and about. And so I don't get up and down moods. It's when one is in alignment with how one can function in certain energetic states of the brain, there's no mood, it's a fact, and one operates based on that. So the bipolar rhythm of up and down in consciousness, which I think consciousness is a field like gravity, I feel that up and down consciousness can sort of be good for the immune system that is a meme immune system. And I think thought and old sound creates a heaviness and a denseness. So it could be sort of the further back we're thinking about or projecting from could create a more dense experience of life, because we're moving further and further away from something that is actual or happening now. And really the brain can only function based on what's happening now. And the up and down in consciousness is good for the immunity against conditioning, thought, and habit. So if I go into a really creative state, I've sort of been deconditioned. And then when I come down, I think that also helps with immunity against conditioning, because it's hard to function in the world that we've been conditioned to function in. And also we see it as a bunch of crap. It's not motivating. If it was intrinsically motivating based on human nature, we would likely be able to go back to functioning in that quite easily. But it takes a lot of force, because once the brain has been deconditioned, it's really hard to condition the brain to buy into that. And it's not really a conscious thing. It's just part of the point of this heightened energy and crisis is to blow apart those structures that aren't real. And so it's really hard to reinstall them again. It's sort of like, taking the hard drive film, that little disc in there, and like putting a big scratch on it. It's going to be really hard to save any data in there. And that also lends to the idea that I've created, that forgetting is more important in functioning not based on memory, habit, and executive function as we know it as conditioned consciousness is perhaps more important. And I think that's part of what I learned last time. And also in the heightened consciousness, we do get new information and memes and meaning. So that also lends to shaking off the conditioned consciousness. So one could think of the up and down rhythm of so-called bipolar as shaking off old thought patterns that we've been given. So yeah, as Krishnamurti talked about, he talked a lot about the mutation of the brain. And the mutation is instantaneous when the whole system of conditioning thought loses its grip on us. However that happens. And when we're free, we move in a totally different way. And Krishnamurti also says, find a way of life that brings a new world into being. So I think we're trying to find that way of life. And to start, it would be good to really discuss these matters with each other. So we've already experienced, if we have been manic, the downfall of going too far into ecstasy. It's just others don't have it. And there could be people who are able to sit in meditation and ecstasy most of the day, or like enlightened masters who are able to do that. But I'm not sure if that's our function as people who go up and down. The up gives us new memes and meaning and new information and a higher perspective of seeing what's going on in the world. And then the down really makes us feel like we don't want to go back to that awful world. But since we're going up and down, we can share. Just like when water goes up and down, it makes a sound. So the up and down movement that we go through, it sort of creates different sounds and different words and different things we can say. Look at the people who are said to have, word salad. I think we can make our words into a beautiful poem and not have it called like a word salad. I think salad's a good thing, so maybe word salad is healthy. So it's not called word pile of shit. And I also wrote down, as you will give reasons for your happiness and that ecstasy that are unseen by the others, and they're plain as day to you. So I guess I'm just saying to myself, don't assume that others can see it and that others' brains are working on the same algorithm that yours is. So that might be something to delineate. How do we know if somebody is not in that state? Well, we can assume that most people aren't, but there could be a sign that people are sick of hearing what one is saying from that other state. Maybe people are talking about their memories or the past or their self or things like that, like the psychological structure that isn't real. And I already talked about how psych meds are dangerous and that they do something to thought. That is why it's important to reduce thinking and rely on perception, action in the moment. So perception, action in the moment is a lot more powerful than thought because it's based on perceiving the moment, not on projecting thought. And if we're able to be in perception, action in the moment, which might be the way in which we're able to see thought being projected at us, asking ourselves, is that a projection? We might be able to stay away from being trapped by it.